welcome to Cohen in the City. And I don't know, as far as I could remember, as long as when I was old enough to know what a radio was, in my household, CJAD was turned on, and it hasn't gone off since. And it's the first thing that I listen to in the morning, and sometimes the last thing I listen to before I go to sleep. And it hasn't lost its luster, celebrating its 75th anniversary. And joining me to talk about it, Program Director Chris Berry, veteran traffic reporter, even though he's not in the helicopter anymore, he's still our ace, RIck Leckner, and Trudie Mason, who recently celebrated her 35th anniversary at the station, and Andrew Peplowski, who has the best sign-off in radio, and he'll do it for us at the end, I hope, retiring at the end of this week, which makes me very sad, joining us as well. So thank you all for joining us. And I guess I'll start off with Chris, who has grown a beard and now looks his age. But when I first met Chris, he was 18 years old. He was the producer of, I think it was the Jim Duff Show, if I'm not mistaken. And now, of course, he's the program director. So Chris, it was 22 years ago that you actually got started at CJAD. Did you ever think you'd be sitting here as program director, steering the ship for the 75th anniversary?
No, by the way, I actually started as producer of Mark Rennie. Jim was already gone when
the late Mark Rennie, yes.
Yeah, so I was part of that transition. No, I never would have. I was 18, 19 at the time. I couldn't think a year into the future, let alone 20 years. I never would have thought that. I do remember the moment coming back to CJAD as program director and walking into Gord's old office, Gord Sinclair's old office on 4th Street, and that felt just overwhelming. You know, a lot of the furniture was still the same as when I'd left 10 years earlier, but to occupy any space that he had and have the same title, it seemed obviously undeserved, but it was a big honor for me. I never thought that far ahead, Mike, for sure.
Well, Chris, you've kept the tradition going beautifully, I have to say, and I think others will all agree with me. Now, Rick, you were with CJAD for many years. I remember as a young camper, your wife was my counselor, and you were picking her up from work. I don't even know if you were married yet, but your work, I was told, my dad said, he's a very important guy at CJAD. And you were up in the helicopter. Tell us, what was it like in those days to be up in a helicopter doing traffic? Of course, we don't do that anymore.
First of all, I must say I just learned something new. Chris and I had something in common, because when I joined CJAD on April Fool's Day, 1968, I had just turned 19, Mr. Berry. Okay. So, but you've kept your youth a lot better than me, I must say. Now, being part of CJAD has, and I've been in one way or another associated with it now for 52 years, which is quite something. But being up on the chopper was a joy. I took over from Len Roecliffe in October of 1969. It was actually the day that Montreal Police went on strike, so I remember it very well. It was a fantastic experience and allowed me to not just give traffic reports, but really do what I still like to do, which is create a little bit of to get things moving in a very efficient and secure way on our roadways. So I was never content just to say, report in a stalled car or an accident. I really got in the face of authorities, and I must say I'm still doing it, and I like doing that. It's all for the benefit of Montrealers.
Well, you're always the go-to guy. Now, Trudie, you of course were also on the chopper. I believe, if I recall, you did some helicopter reports, correct?
I was the backup for Andrew Carter when Andrew Carter was the afternoon traffic guy and Rick was doing mornings. And my most memorable experience then involved Rick, because my very first week filling in for Andrew Carter was the week of the big rainstorm that filled up the Décarie Expressway. That was my first experience doing helicopter traffic, except that day we couldn't get anywhere. I had been downtown and I couldn't get to any of the helipads where the chopper might land to pick me up once the ceiling lifted enough that we could actually get the chopper into the air after the storm had passed. But the chopper could get to Rick. So thank heavens Rick was available And Rick went up that afternoon, and I reported on the traffic from the ground because I was stuck on the ground. I remember driving through the most horrendous puddles. And I'm sure, Rick, your view from up top must have been mind-boggling.
You have a great memory, Trudie, because that's exactly what happened. And we found, believe it or not, a little bit of a high ground at the Fairview Shopping Center. So I got the pilot to land somewhat illegally, I must say, in the parking lot of Fairview. And I think he picked me up late afternoon, and we flew till about 10 o'clock that night. And the sites were only, this was July 14th, 1987, if I recall. And the sites were only equal during the January 1998 ice storm.
Great memories. Now, Andrew Peplowski, why did you decide for the 75th anniversary to retire from News Talk Radio, CJAD? Why did you decide to do that?
Because it was time. You know, Mike, I've been doing this since the mid-70s, and sort of ran the gamut from radio into television. And then, thanks to Chris Berry, back into radio again. Radio was always my first love, but in answer to your question, it just felt like the time was right. It really had nothing to do with the anniversary of CJAD. It was a personal decision. It was something I was thinking about in the spring. But with the onset of the pandemic, I was thinking, what am I going to retire into? And decided to go for a few more months. But after speaking with my wife, we decided that now was the time, despite the fact that the situation hasn't improved somewhat. I think it's just time for me to move on and make a space for someone else and let them make their mark. I'm proud as punch to have wrapped up a 40+ year career at CJAD. You know, I tried twice before in past incarnations to get to work at CJAD because it was always the pinnacle of radio news in Montreal, and I never quite made it for different reasons. So for me, it's been the cherry on the cake. I've been there 10 years. I've been in radio and television in Montreal for more than 40. It was time for me to move on, as simple as that. I think the other thing I'm really proud of, I feel as if I'm still on top of my game and could probably go longer if I really want to, but my heart just isn't in it as it once was.
That's a very, very acceptable answer, Andrew, even though I'm going to miss you terribly. And so are many of the listeners. Chris, CJAD has always been at the top of its game, but you had a new challenge in March with the pandemic, and you really must be proud of your team and how you've been able to deliver the message to our community, because I think you've become more necessary than ever.
Yeah, and it has been a challenge, and I think it's a challenge professionally. It's a challenge for everyone personally too. I know anybody I talk to is tired and fed up and worn out, and I think that's the case for staffers here as well too. But they've kept pushing every day and kept, getting live coverage of those press conferences and sending out the alerts with the latest numbers and putting experts on the air. I've been really, really impressed and very proud with the job that we've done all these months, and it's not over yet. We had record-breaking COVID numbers on the weekend, and so it looks like we've got another few months ahead of us like this. But I couldn't be more proud of how hard everyone's worked and how much they were able to keep their energy up throughout it all.
I agree, and as I said, it's always been a go-to station, but right now, and it's 7 days a week. It's not just weekdays, it's evenings, it's whatever time you turn the radio on, CJAD is letting you know what's going on. Now, Rick, you worked with a lot of incredible people. Who are some of those that you have such fond memories? I'm sure George Balkan must be at the top of the list. I'm old enough to remember not only George Balkan, but had the great privilege of meeting him, knowing him, interviewing him. An amazing person, people like that.
Well, clearly George's name always comes to mind. It's for a long time was the brand of CJAD and probably still is to some degree. I worked with a lot of great people. And as I said, when I first started at CJAD, I was 19 years old. And here I was working with the likes of George Balkan, Gord Sinclair, Ted Blackman, Rod Dewar, Paul Reed. I remember I used to sit in the studio some nights with Paul Reed and just listen in awe as he did his show. I got very ticked off in 1973 at George Balkan because he went out one day, lost his way, and went over to CFCF for a couple of years. But he finally, regained his mental ability and came back to CJAD 2 years later. That was very depressing to me, quite frankly, because it was a joy working with George in the morning. But as I say, he found his way back. But there are just so many names that have been through the door and through the studios at CJAD. Andy Barry, Melanie King, Anna Gardner. And to think I worked with all these people. I probably worked with 4 or 5 morning men, and they've all been fantastic. George, of course, was and still is the king.
Absolutely. Now, Trudie, 35 years on CJAD. You've done so many things. First of all, you met your husband, Kevin Holden, there. You co-hosted a show which I still personally dearly miss. It was one of the shows, the only show that I've ever had in Montreal that talked about TV shows. And I would just love to see a nostalgic comeback to just listen to you and Kevin talk about Netflix shows, because that didn't exist back then. You did the traffic, you've done the news, and you do your newscast in the morning. And your little teaser, you always tease us with some type of little funny story. And then it makes me, I have to listen to that newscast to find out what you're talking about. When did you start that, Trudie?
Well, the inspiration for that was actually Gord Sinclair, because he often had what he called his aw shucks story at the end of his newscast. And I really came to appreciate them. And the older I got, and the more bad news I had to report, and year after year after year, I think I've grown to appreciate that part of the newscast even more, because I figure that if I need a little bit of relief, something a little bit light or oddball, weird or entertaining at the end of a newscast, if I need that, I think listeners need that too. So now I go out of my way to look for good, they're called kicker stories in journalism talk. So I go out of my way to look for good kickers that I think the audience might appreciate, because it's just, after so much bad news, it's just nice to have a little bit of relief.
Absolutely. And one last thing about your relationship with Andrew Carter. You go back since your kids, and you just kibitz on the air. You can't help but laugh. He brings up stuff that you guys did together like 40 years ago. So you must enjoy working with Andrew.
Oh yeah, it's a delight. And we grew up together in Dorval, and our families knew each other. We went to the same church. So I think that I can give him the gears the way maybe some other people at the station don't feel they could give him the gears, but I could give him the gears, because I remember when he used to be Andy and not Andrew.
Well, I remember when Andrew Peplowski was Andy Harris. Yeah. I remember that. Maybe some people watching this video will remember that. But Andrew Peplowski, what are you going to do now? You're certainly not going to just retire and go home and watch that. You must have a plan. There must be something on your agenda.
Well, I'll tell you, the plan was to start traveling almost immediately. But
that's a good thing to do now. As
soon as that went out the window, I'm spending all my travel money on renovating my bathroom at the moment. Eventually, the plan is to do a lot of traveling. We ski quite often at Tremblant, and if everything falls into place in February, we'll be out west, and we're sort of going to do a 6-week tour of Alberta and British Columbia, and just stop at all the ski hills that I haven't been able to ski at because work always seemed to get in the way. And I'm finally looking forward to having that freedom to go when I want, where I want, as I want.
Well, with that voice, Andrew, certainly I would love you to voice my commercials for the school board. And I'm sure there'd be many in line to do that. So please don't completely retire that. Those golden pipes of yours, they're still of value.
Well, thanks very much for saying that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, okay. Voice for hire. I like it.
Andrew, before we go, could you do me a favor? Could you do the sign up for us, the CJAD News Talk Radio? No one does it like you.
Sure. Breaking news, as it happens, news, talk, radio. CJAD 800.
I love it. I love it. Trudie, you're going to have to start doing that on the half hour. Please start practicing.
I don't know if I can get my voice that low, but I'll give it a shot.
I have two more questions for our panel. RIck Leckner, is traffic worse today than it was when you were in the helicopter?
Yes, primarily because there's a decided lack of coordination, and the current administration that has a decided bias for cyclists, or preference, I should say, for cyclists and pedestrians rather than motorists. And it's frustrating, it's dangerous, and it needs to get better. Hopefully things will change, and this is an election year, and maybe some people will see their senses and make things a little bit more orderly on our roads.
When I do this video podcast in 25 years, Chris Barry's young enough that he will be there for the 100th anniversary. Chris, can we count on that?
Sure, absolutely. If I should be so lucky, I'll still be running the station in 25 years. Absolutely.
All right, you got my vote. Listen, I want to congratulate all of you for the great work you do, and good luck with the 75th anniversary, and stay safe.
Thanks.
I want to
Mike.
put in one
Thanks,
last word, if I
Yes,
may.
Rick, go ahead. One last thing. Go ahead.
Everybody's thanking everybody, but we need to thank Montreal. We need to thank our listeners, because we would be nothing without the very loyal audience that has developed over these 75 years, dedicated without any condition to CJAD. Thank you, Montreal.
Rick
Good point.
Leckner,
Well
who was
said.
a politician in Dollard, and who knows, he could be on Denny Coderre's ticket next year. Just
Don't
never
count on it.
Don't count on it. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone,
Mike.
again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike.